Hello everyone, I'm MVL and this is...
The Jonin Monkey, hey!
And today my friend Jonin has hooked me up with a bunch of loose GameCube discs and we're going to go over them in this pickups video, and gameplay footage will be included for every game. So let's just dive straight into it. First up we have Baton Kaitos on the GameCube.
These are very much sought after, especially with the HD remake coming out for the Switch pretty soon, and I'm pretty sure they're going to be sought after since from what I've heard there's a lot of things that the HD remake is going to remove from the GameCube version, such as the English dub. Like, it was kind of infamous for how wonky it was, but they've decided to just completely take it out of the HD version. Likewise, this game, it's based around a card game system in its battlefield where the actions you could take, like, you would have a hand generated and you would have to choose which cards to play in order to get the best use out of your turn. From what I've seen, it looks like in the HD version they've oversimplified it, so they've decided to remove some of the luck and card game elements from it, which I feel like it kind of takes something away from it, personally.
So this is a GameCube exclusive card-based RPG.
Yes.
To your point, they are doing a remake of this, which they're doing with a lot of RPGs recently, which is always good because it means you're more capable to get it on a modern system and it's more available to audiences that wouldn't have seen it the first time around. So that's always good.
That's 100%. That's definitely the positive side of this. It's definitely an RPG that was more of a cult classic on the GameCube. It didn't get that much attention, and it's one of those games that definitely deserves an HD release just because this has an incredibly strong art direction and would look incredibly beautiful in HD. So yeah, I can fully understand why this game's getting remade for future systems.
That's Baton Kaitos on the GameCube.
And next up we have Dragon Ball Z Budokai.
Now this is a game that I have had on other systems. This is a fighting game set in the Dragon Ball universe.
Indeed. Many years before Dragon Ball FighterZ, and I believe it's had many HD re-releases because there is a definite fan following for this game.
So it's a game that I have played before and I do really like. I used to have a collector's edition of one of these on the PlayStation 2 and it got water damaged and I haven't been able to replace it. So I'm always glad to get copies of these games. They're really fun fighters and they're really fast and they're really over the top like you expect for Dragon Ball Z.
Oh yeah, 100%.
In the first place. You'll do finishing moves where the entire world will get destroyed and it won't even knock out your opponent. It's like you just destroy the world but it didn't even finish your opponent.
It's one of the fun elements of every Dragon Ball fighting game. Like even Dragon Ball FighterZ from our system works. All these years later, all the HD update, it still has exactly what you described, the world-destroying attacks that don't actually knock out an opponent.
Well, it's a fantastic game and it's a great multiplayer game as well to play with a friend, and the best thing about it is most fighters haven't even reached their final form yet.
Also, it's kind of funny, this version surprisingly doesn't have an English dub on it. It's pure Japanese, which is kind of an interesting fact.
That's kind of crazy, but I suppose it's probably subtitled, right?
Yeah, it is definitely subtitled at the very least.
This was Dragon Ball Z Budokai on the GameCube. Next up we have Donkey Konga 2.
This is a musical arcade game. It was part of, I believe Nintendo called it Project Triforce, which along with Mario Kart GP and another game that we're going to introduce later down the line, was working with Bandai Namco and Sega in an attempt to get more people back into the arcades. So they released an arcade version of this game along with the physical version, which you're seeing right now. Donkey Konga 2 is the sequel to Donkey Konga, which is based on what's known as a taiko drum game in Japan. Imagine it like Dance Dance Revolution, but with bongos.
So, if you're wondering, the gameplay footage for this will be captured using the DK bongos, because I actually have the bongos for the original game, which I got in a set, and I've been waiting for an excuse to bring them out again, just to hammer those things.
Oh, yes. This is the Western version, so whilst the Japanese version had basically cult hit anime openings, this one has a lot of music that was popular at the time. It's an interesting selection, I'm not going to lie.
No Metallica then?
Sadly, no.
Dude, I would love to be hammering those, like, beats on the conga.
That was a missed opportunity they should have taken.
Well, there you go. That was Donkey Konga 2 on the GameCube.
And on a similar vein, next up we have Donkey Kong Jungle Beat.
I imagine this is very much in a similar vein. I actually don't know much about this one, so take it away, Jonan.
Oh, this is a fun artifact from history. Oh, imagine this. The Rare buyout has happened. There's going to be no way to continue Donkey Kong Country, so they decide to take the DK platformer series in a completely different direction. By which I mean, they make a platformer that is controlled by the DK Bongos.
That sounds amazing. I imagine you're seeing pinpoint gameplay footage for myself right now that is absolutely flawless. And on a side note, I know that Rareware did amazingly well after the acquisition with Microsoft, and they made loads of Kinect games, and they did really well. Wait a minute, that didn't happen, never mind.
Yeah, it's one of those unfortunate moments of history, but yeah, it's a really fun arcade platformer, it's a short game, but it's one of those games that's based on trying to do a level over and over again in order to get the high score, and there's loads of opportunities to do that, which is kind of fun. I think for me, my favourite part of the game is very specifically the con boss battles. There are several different types of boss battles in the game, but once in every world, you get to battle another con, the likes of Dread Con, Karate Con, Ninja Con, etc. And these take the form of what I can only describe as Punch-Out, where you clap to dodge, and then one bongo becomes the left fist, the other bongo becomes the right fist. I know it sounds like I am describing a fever dream, but I assure you it's definitely the most fun part of the game.
I mean, to me it sounds like typical Nintendo with controls as far as it goes.
Yeah, and one last little factoid about why this is such a weird little interesting artifact in history, and you'll probably see from the gameplay footage that some of the creatures look a little crazy. This is made by Koizumi. He's the guy who wrote the story for Link's Awakening, then went on to be one of the directors of Ocarina of Time, and he was the director of this game. So if anything looks a bit weird, that might be why.
Some of my favourite games of all time mentioned then, so that gives me a lot of intrigue towards this. Well, there you go, that's Donkey Kong Jungle Beat on the GameCube. And next up we have Fire Emblem Path of Radiance on the GameCube. So I know that this is one of the most sought after games on the GameCube.
Yep, indeed, and I know there are some people that are screaming at me for partying with this, but you know, sometimes some games need a new home and I don't really have the time. But yeah, the reason why, there are two big reasons this is sought after. First off, this is the game that introduced Ike into the world, as in the Ike that appears in Smash Bros. So a lot of people have an attachment to it, and a lot of fans would argue this, and I would argue it as well, one of the better stories Fire Emblem has ever had. So it is a strategy RPG. You follow Aiku in a slight change up for Fire Emblem. He doesn't start out as a lord, he starts out as just a rookie in a mercenary company, and from there he eventually becomes embroiled in a larger conflict as the country they started gets completely overrun in a war, and he then has to, for various reasons, he gets involved into a larger conflict and eventually has to lead the rebellion to take back said country.
Well, I know that GameCube games were made in smaller print runs than, let's say, the PlayStation 2, for example.
Yeah.
And definitely RPGs are more sought after. You look at stuff on like PlayStation 1, like Sudoku, which are demanding higher prices because people are after these games. So this is definitely a game that I've had on my radar for a long time and I've always wanted to take a look at. Thank you, Jonah, for hooking me up with it.
No worries.
And yeah, it's a highly rated one by a lot of people as well, so I'm excited to give it a go. That's Fire Emblem Path of Radiance on the GameCube.
And next up we have FZero DX.
This confuses me a little bit. DX is director's cut for a couple of games. What is GX?
I think the second game in the series was F-Zero X, and then G means it's one step above. I don't know. I totally don't know. What I do know is that it's the second half of the Triforce collaboration I mentioned earlier. So there was an arcade version of this game as well, and this is a collaboration between Nintendo and Sega, who were trying to essentially, it was an attempt to launch F-Zero into a more popular franchise and make it something that would be both an arcade hit and a home hit. Sadly, in what you could basically say is the summary of the entire F-Zero X franchise, it had a lot of fans, but not as many as Mario Kart, which is why Nintendo focused more on Mario Kart in recent years.
Yeah, I guess I would liken that to something like Perfect Dark when it moved to the Xbox platform, where I have a big fondness for Perfect Dark, but a small game called Combat Evolved, also known as Halo, did extremely well, and that kind of took over that spot which Perfect Dark was going to fill. And then it's a similar thing with Mario Kart with F-Zero, I guess.
Yeah, basically, like, they've been struggling to differentiate it, which they definitely try to do, because it's got that classic F-Zero vibe of high-speed racers and the ability to actively, aggressively attack players and blow them up. But it also has some interesting features in there, like the first time at this point in the series, they did it again with the Game Boy Advance games that came after this, but they've included a full-on story mode, which is just as cheesy and over-the-top as you want it to be, and although surprisingly brutally hard, more than you would expect it to be, but if you want a good challenge, there's that as well. And on top of that, you've also got the Make a Racer mode, which allows you to create an F-Zero craft of your choice. So yeah, there was a lot of cool fun features here, and also there's a lot of attempt to bring the cast to life, where every time you win a Grand Prix, you would have a fully voiced interview with your racer, which you could choose the questions for the interviewer. It's got a lot of fun stuff and a lot of personality, and it's a shame that it didn't quite make the success people were hoping for, but many people consider either this or F-Zero X as the best in the franchise.
Well, there you go. That was FZero DX on the GameCube. Next up we have Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door on the GameCube. Now, I freely admit this is the game I am most excited about in the bunch, having recently played Mario RPG on the Super Nintendo by way of the Super Nintendo Classic Mini, because the original game never came out over here in the UK, with the announcement of the remake of the Mario RPG, the original game. I know that the Paper Mario series offshooted from that as kind of a spiritual successor from the Nintendo 64 onwards, and you also got the Mario and Luigi RPG series that spanned after that as well on different platforms, mainly because Squaresoft was behind the original Mario RPG, and thereafter the PlayStation parted ways for a bit.
Yes, so if I remember correctly, the Intelligent Systems were behind Paper Mario specifically, and Alpha Dream were behind the Mario and Luigi series. But this is indeed the sequel to Paper Mario that was originally on the N64, and many people considered this one of the true grades, because this is the nice subtle evolution on the original. It's the same turn-based combat that people really loved about Paper Mario, and the characters all have the same fun, quirky personality. It's an RPG that has a good story that doesn't take itself too seriously, which is the hallmark of any successful Mario RPG. And it's the last game in the Paper Mario series to really follow this formula exclusively, because after that you would get the wild deviations where Super Paper Mario for the Wii plays more like a 2D platformer, and then the other RPGs that followed, Sticker Star and Color Splash, based themselves very much on gimmicks in both gameplay and visuals. So in terms of like the classic Paper Mario formula, this game feels like the perfect evolution of that.
Well, I'm a big fan of more traditional RPGs. I like turn-based combat because I like to be able to drink a coffee while playing a video game, and that's perfect for me. So there you go. That's Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door on the GameCube.
And next up we have Pokemon XD, Gale of Darkness.
I know DX means Director's Cut. XD is an emoticon, right? It's a smiling face.
I genuinely don't know what they were going for the title, especially when, fun fact, this is a sequel to the other Pokemon GameCube RPG, Pokemon Colosseum. And that game, the word Colosseum is spelt wrong, deliberately, by admission from the developers, in order to create a unique brand. I really wish I was joking.
Cool.
On-key marketing aside, this series is the first attempt to make a Pokemon RPG on consoles. So this is the follow-up to that. Whereas Pokemon Colosseum was trying to be a bit more dark and gritty with its premise and visuals, Pokemon XD tries to find a balance between that and the more friendly, colourful tone of the Pokemon series. So it is set in the Ore region, and it follows on from Colosseum's story, where there is an evil group that is trying to create a new breed of Pokemon called Shadow Pokemon. These are Pokemon who have, if I remember the lore correctly, have had their hearts artificially closed, so it makes them more powerful, but at the cost of the Pokemon's heart and soul. And you have what's known as the Snag'em device. So, essentially, Yes, I know the phrasing. What the snagging device does, and this is sort of the gimmick for this game, is that this is the only game where you can steal Pokemon off trainers. Whilst there are some wild Pokemon catcher mechanics in this game, in the Ore region there aren't that many wild Pokemon. Instead, trainers have to import their Pokemon. But a lot of these Pokemon are actually shadow Pokemon, so essentially you are trying to take Pokemon away from people who have bought shadow Pokemon. So basically it's a 3D Pokemon RPG, and there's a lot of fun to be had, even if the premise sounds weirder the more you would say it out loud.
Well, shadow Pokemon sounds a bit shady to me.
Oh,
I'm more familiar with the N64 game, where myself and yourself enjoyed the mini games a lot.
Oh yes, and this is actually kind of on a similar vein. It sadly doesn't have the mini games, but it does allow you to take your team from the Game Boy Advance games and put them on the big screen so that you can indeed duke it out in glorious 3D graphics.
Well, it will give me something to do with my Game Boy Advance to GameCube cable that I have, and the couple of games that does work with. So
yeah.
There you go. That's Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness on the GameCube. Next up we have Shadow the Hedgehog on the GameCube.
The classic spin-off that, well, like all Sonic games, it's divisive, pretty much because the developers freely admitted that, at the time, many people wanted to see a spin-off of Shadow the Hedgehog, and because of the popularity of games like Grand Theft Auto and a lot of first-person shooters at the time, a lot of fans were sending letters saying, wouldn't it be cool if Sonic used a gun? So the developers decided to placate that by giving Shadow a gun instead. So the game's attempts to be dark and gritty with anthropomorphic animal characters, it's kind of divisive. But I honestly think, whether it's from an ironic standpoint or from a genuine standpoint, there is some elements to enjoy from here. It's definitely a very interesting artifact from history. As the story goes, you are playing the Shadow the Hedgehog, who, during an alien invasion by a group known as the Black Arms, Adder is collecting the Chaos Emeralds in the hopes that finding all 7 of them will unlock his memories, which at the time he has completely forgotten. But as part of that, this game also has the gimmick where during levels you can decide whether you want to help the good guys fight the aliens, help the bad guys destroy the world, or just ignore both sides and just get to the end of the level.
So I actually already had this on the Xbox, and I remember Shadow and firearms, and I thought it was some kind of fever dream.
You're not the only one who's had that reaction, in fairness.
Well, it's certainly a different take on a Sonic game, at least thematically. I think one of the things a lot of people would agree with is that the 2D Sonic games are a lot more endearing to the fans.
In fairness, the 2D games also had a bit more polish since this was during a time between Sonic Adventure 1 and Sonic Colors. Sega were going through a massive off patch, what with having to drop out the console business, and a lot of these games were worked under with tight deadlines, so they don't have quite the same polish as the 2D games, but even with all of the jank, there is still a lot of charm in there, I would say.
So yes, but let's hope this doesn't end up being more like Sonic 2006.
Yeah, that was not a good one, but yes.
And with that said, swiftly moving on to the next game.
And next up we have The Simpsons Hit and Run.
Now this is a game with the characters from the popular television show The Simpsons.
It's sort of a hybrid between The Simpsons and Grand Theft Auto, is the way I would describe it. Most of the game is racing around the city in various Simpsons vehicles, but there are also some platforming sections to be had.
The Simpsons is one of those cartoon shows that's really clever in the fact that it has jokes aimed at people of an older age, and it has jokes aimed at people of a younger age, and it really cleverly steers the line, if you pardon the pun, between having jokes for both audiences and not allowing there to be much of a mix between. So, like, the jokes aimed at adults are over the heads of people they're not meant for, and there's also really silly stuff there to entertain the younger people.
Indeed, and I think this is probably why this is one of the more successful attempts to market Grand Theft Auto to a younger audience, because these are goofier characters who could probably get away with doing stuff like everything in Grand Theft Auto without it being too controversial.
I think a lot of the controversy in Grand Theft Auto was actually overlooked when the game series became more popular and made more money.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And The Simpsons, as we know, is an incredibly successful franchise. The Simpsons has gotten away with a lot of stuff.
And there's plenty of getting away to be had in this game as well. That is the Simpsons Hit and Run for the GameCube.
Next up we have Super Monkey Ball 2 on the GameCube.
Yes, this was a fun arcade title. The game is controlled entirely with the joystick, and it is basically a whole speed and momentum based gameplay. You have to guide the characters through these individual courses by tilting the stage and try desperately to control the momentum of the small ball that they are inside.
Yeah, it's essentially like a marble run, and you have to get to the end without falling off the platforms.
Yes.
It's a really simple concept, but it allows for a lot of creativity in the courses. And having played games on this series before, and it's actually a game series that has been remastered recently on modern consoles, which is a kind of a theme with a lot of successful games. And proof to its success, this game is actually very enjoyable to play. It's one of those games that's easy to pick up, but difficult to master.
Indeed, and you mentioned Pokemon Stadium earlier. This is a similar game where, even outside of the main mode, there's a lot of mini-games and fun multiplayer modes to be had. There's racing, but then there's also stuff like boxing matches, where you attempt to knock each other off with boxing gloves attached to the balls. And also, if you want something more relaxed, pool. You can play pool using monkeys.
You know, the great thing about that is if someone recording the gameplay footage isn't great at the main game, they can throw in a lot of footage of that stuff.
Indeed.
And still no one will be none the wiser unless you say it out loud, which I just did.
Yes, and there is indeed a story mode to this game, which just the first cutscene alone is like a wild fever dream. Just, there are some things that just need to be seen to be believed, is all I'll say.
Well, there you go. You gotta see it to believe it. Super Monkey Ball 2 on the GameCube.
And next up we have Viewtiful Joe.
So this is a beat-em-up game with a cartoony comic book style to it. I would actually compare it somewhat, the visual style that is, to stuff you got from websites like Newgrounds at the time.
Yeah,
which
I can see
had
that.
flash games with a kind of cartoony style to them, but the gameplay was always on point. Obviously, this is a lot more detailed than a flash game, but it invokes that kind of style to me visually.
Yes, and this is one of those games that started off as a GameCube exclusive, but then, as it got more popular, was then ported out to other systems, notably the PlayStation 2 at the time, before eventually the future sequels branched out to all platforms. But yes, this is a very visual game as you play as Joe, who, when he was watching his favourite superhero movie, Captain Blue, is suddenly sucked into the movie screen and now has to take on the role as the replacement superhero. And it's kind of fun because they're definitely going with that movie theme in that you have the ability to speed up the footage, which allows you to move faster, slow, which allows you to dodge and also hit people with even more power, and zoom, which basically allows you to zoom in and punch people while speed lines pass around you. As yes, this is a super fun visual Capcom beat-em-up, and it has a massive cult following due to its unique visual style and really fun gameplay and boss battles. And of course, there are many fun movie references throughout.
Well, I always find beat-em-ups a great game, like shoot-em-up games and things like that, where you can just pick them up and play them quite easily. So this is definitely a genre I enjoy, and it's a game series that I know is very popular. That's Viewtiful Joe on the GameCube. And next up, would you believe we have Viewtiful Joe 2 on the GameCube. So obviously sequel to the original game, another great game by a great studio like Capcom.
Indeed. And the sequel follows up the story of the original with Alien Invasion.
Well, that sounds like something Capcom would do.
Yeah.
And speaking of games that were exclusive to the GameCube and ported elsewhere, Capcom has a history of that, with Resident Evil 0 originally being a GameCube exclusive, but finding more success on other consoles.
Yes, sadly this was something that was very common with the GameCube era at the time. But yes, this game gives you more goodness from the original, with the twist this time in that it could be a co-op. I believe you can either play both at the same time, but in single player you can switch between two characters, Viewtiful Joe himself and his girlfriend, who now takes on the name of Sexy Sylvia.
That sounds like something from Lucha Underground.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's funny as well that they made a TV series to go with this, and they had to rename her Go-Go Sylvia in order to try and get around that.
Well, that sounds more appropriate.
But yes, there is all the same movie editing power-ups, except for instead of zoom in, Sylvia has the action replay option where it's an all-or-nothing kind of power where you can either hit someone for 3 times the impact or get hit yourself for 3 times the pain.
You know, Action Replay was also the name of a cheat system for various consoles.
Yes. And it's funny you should say that. We'll get to that later in the video. But yes.
Well, it's another cool beat-em-up game from a very successful and renowned studio. So this game looks really cool, and yeah, certainly it looks like it's going to be fun to play.
And it's another fun moment in history, although a kind of bittersweet one, just to prepare people, because like Shinigami 2 before it, this is a game that ended on a cliffhanger, and at the time of recording, we have not seen a resolution.
Well, I guess only time will tell. Maybe like Shenmue, a mere 20 years later, we might get another game.
We have some interesting freebies. So, here's a fun question for you. How many of you British/European fans remember the magazine Cube? And the reason why I mention that is because among my collection, as something I thought I would hand over to MVL's magnificent collection and museum, is a series of mini discs, if you remember this glorious era, that came with it. The first one being an interesting artifact. This is a mini video disc that has in it exclusive footage from E3 2004, which has many games highlights at the time, including what this proudly boasts as exclusive in-game footage of Metroid Prime 2 Echoes.
So, you used to get demo discs and video discs with a lot of magazines back in the day, and then sometimes you would even get full games going back to systems like the Commodore 64 and the Amiga and so forth. I actually really like demo discs, even the video side, just to get a sample of a game visually.
Yeah.
I will still sometimes pick up demo discs secondhand so I can pop them in and see what the games look like at that time. And sometimes some of those games never made it to fruition, so you can see a lot of games that were never released as well.
Yeah, that is true. And a lot of games like this, it's like you say, sometimes video footage is all you need to buy a game, because I don't know if this is the exact same disc, but I picked up one of my favourite games of all time, Tales of Symphonia, because of footage shown on a disc like this. So
next up we have a cheats disc.
Multiple, in fact.
These came with magazines.
Yeah, the same Cube magazine. Sometimes they were video discs, but a lot of the time they were these cheat discs, which were essentially samples for the Action Replay. Now, how would you describe Action Replay?
Yes, well, I had Action Replay for things like the PlayStation 2, and essentially it was a bit like the kind of cheats cartridge you would get for things like the NES, where you used codes sometimes, or sometimes they were already included codes, where they would alter the games. Sometimes they would do stuff the game wasn't supposed to do. Sometimes you would get like save files where the games could do different things. Action Replay could do a lot of stuff. I've got one of the Action Replays that just lets you play DVDs from any region, for example.
All of these discs were essentially free samples for what the Action Replay could do, but for 4 games at a time. So just to take one out of a pile here, this one includes cheats for Legends of Wrestling 2, Baldur's Gate, Super Monkey Ball, and the Japanese version of Soul Calibur 2, which hadn't been released overseas yet at the time. I guess the equivalent of it would be accessing the cheats menu in a Steam game, because Action Replay would allow loads of fun things to do, like whether it would be giving yourself infinite boosts in FZero, or activating what was known as the moon jump, essentially the ability to jump even higher. So if you wanted to get past certain sections, you would enable the moon jump, and there you go.
Yeah, so it's funny that you should mention games from other regions, because one thing I know, some of the Action Replays, for example, the PlayStation 2, there's an Action Replay that allows you to play games from other regions, and that is really sought after.
Yeah.
But a lot of people want to play games from outside of their region on their original hardware without having to import consoles from another region.
Yeah.
So it's definitely useful for that. And like I mentioned, I'm always interested to see the games from the region. Or let's cheat on a game and make it a bit easier. Some games are really difficult, and, you know, maybe God mode might be required so you don't take any damage in a game to get through it. Well, anyway, last up, we have a PC game here. And
Tex Murphy, Overseer.
there you go.
From what I understand, this is like an FMV point-and-click adventure game, and I picked it up thinking, oh cool, this will be a fun thing to play through. Unfortunately, you can only work on an older PC. It is available on EA Origin, if you do want to try and download it digitally.
Stuff like Good Old Games, Steam, and EA, for example, are ways you can get older games to work. Always nice to get a big box game. You don't see much of this these days. And I'm guilty of it in the sense that you took some of your games out of the boxes.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of taking a lot of my big box games out of the big boxes and just throwing away the rest of it, so it's a lot easier to keep the jewel case on the shelf.
Yeah, that's why, for anyone wondering, that's why all the GameCube discs are loose.
So there you go. Those were the video game pickups from my friend, the Jonin Monkey, on the GameCube. As you saw, a lot of loose discs there. My plan is to restore them to a point, to get covers, print them out, and add cases to it, and then I'll be able to put them on the shelf. Much thanks to you, Jonin Monkey, for this incredible haul of games. Thank you so much for helping me out here and hooking me up with these games.
No worries, they needed a good home.
And thank you for watching. If you like the video, be sure to leave a like or a comment to let us know what you think, and don't forget to subscribe for more awesome content. And if you'd like to, you can also support me through Patreon or YouTube channel membership. Thank you for watching. I've been MVL, and this was
The Jonin Monkey.
and we will catch you next time.